So, Malazan? I guess it's time to make a Malazan video now, since I, been kind of silent on it so far. Hi, my name is Pete. This is the Ponderings of Pete. If you didn't know, if I'm wearing a funky hat, it has to end with wings on it. It's because of the Shelf Space Olympic Readathon, and Team Hermes is going to win. If you don't believe that, then you can just shove off. Not really. Stay. Let's talk about Malazan. So I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. I might if I have extensive thoughts, I might put a brief spoilery section at the end. Stay tuned. I will warn you. I've been reading Malazan since, actually before I started Booktube. I finished Gardens of the Moon the month, in August of last year, and then I picked up Dead House Gates right as I was starting on Booktube last October. And since then, I've been slowly making my way through it. I just recently finished the Hounds. I figured it was time to do a dedicated Malazan video, simply because I do like the series and I want to do more videos about it. So I figured first video I could do, my Malazan journey so far. So, where am I? What are my thoughts? I think, first of all, I really like it. I really like Erikson's writing style. It's very personal for how it is. And this actually picks up more after, I think, Dead House Gates. In Memories of Ice is really where it's first starts getting personal, and it gets better, especially in House of Chains. And then on there, he gets better with his characterizations, which are weird. They're very different from a lot of other people's writing. There's a lot of little ways that he shapes the characters that aren't your typical ways, I would say. His descriptions tend to be... I feel like his descriptions of people tend to be a little bit light, especially when you're getting into, say, the Malazan soldiers, but the characterization picks up in other ways. I also really like the military aspects of Steven Erikson. I guess before Malazan, before Booktube really, I hadn't read many military-focused fantasies or any military-focused books in general, and I didn't realize how much I would like it. I do like seeing how battles play out, specifically how our individual characters play out, and I just like the way that Erikson writes battle scenes. I'm not talking about switch swash battle scenes. I'm talking about battle scenes, epic scenes. You're talking, whether it's the Battle of Pelennor Fields from Lord of the Rings, even though Erikson didn't write that. Yep, stuff but that's an example of the battle type of scene that I'm talking about, or the crossing of the river from Dead House Gates. That whole scene. In fact, Dead House Gates is where actually the last one where I think it changes. When you get into Memories of Ice, he actually changes how he writes battles. And you see this, and this is in the Siege in Memories of Ice, the first one, the one that you see. You know what it is if you read it. He changes his writing style to something more personal, where you start following more individual POVs throughout the battle. And I feel like with the crossing battle in Dead House Gates, crossing of the river, certain river, you know what it is, it's a little bit more heads up. It starts out focusing on one character, and then at a certain point, it's almost like the camera zooms out, and you see the entire battle, and he describes the entire battle. The Siege of Capristan, it had a little bit of that in there, but very little. He tended to jump around from different characters that he had placed strategically throughout the battles, essentially. And I really like that. And he continues with this trend, this style of writing throughout the rest of his writing. And this really is evident in Bone Hunters, first of all, and Reaper's Gale. And you have some of my favorite battles and military sequences, specifically in Reaper's Gale, because of how he frames things and how he follows characters, and how you get a sense of what is happening through the eyes of the characters, and you can follow the battle just from the eyes of the characters. So that's what I really like about his military aspects of things. Other things, one critique that I've heard of Erikson, which I will address because I think it's interesting, is that he has a lot of unnecessary points of view in his books. And it's true, he has a lot. But I think throughout all of them, and I think the Hounds and probably Reaper's Gale are two of the biggest ones that I would say you would probably think commit this sin, so to speak, of too many points of view. But I think they're all necessary in a lot of different reasons. The Hounds is the plot is a veritable spider web of a plot. All these threads converge at the end. You see a lot of these different small POVs, and you see different aspects of what is happening and different threads, and you don't necessarily see why you need those POVs till the end. Reaper's Gale, with the campaign that's happening in that book, and the way the campaign is happening, the individual, the many POVs that are portrayed in Reaper's Gale, I think are very necessary to give you a sense of the campaign and paint a picture that is really epic in scale and really cool. So, does he have unnecessary POVs? I couldn't tell you that every character POV that he has is necessary, but there are a lot, and I think he does have some semblance of purpose, whether it is philosophical, plot-driven, or character-driven, to the POVs that he writes. And that's another thing that I've sort of started diving into, is the philosophy in Malazan Book of the Fallen in general. I know there's a lot I missed, and I think two of the books that are kind of lower on my ranking that I was like, I think are more philosophically and theme-wise really heavy, and the people that I've talked to that enjoy those books enjoy them for the philosophical and moral themes that they have. That kind of makes me a little bit more excited on a reread to see if I can attach more to the characters and everything, because I understand them a little bit more about what's going on. I really like the themes of compassion that are throughout this series, and I like that I knew that before going into the series, that like the goal, one of the overarching themes that runs throughout different pieces of the series is compassion. I like that I knew that going into it, because it provided a little bit of context for some of the stuff that happens, and a little bit of bird's eye view for myself. I really like how mysterious this world is. Erikson, the first book, Gardens of the Moon, Erikson basically drops you in the middle of a war and you have no idea what's going on, and you have to piece it together for the first half of the book and figure out what's going on. I think overall, you don't really get a sense. I didn't get a sense of what was everything, and didn't get a handle on everything until book 3, Memories of Ice, which is one of my favorites. It's definitely up there in the ranking, as you will see at the end. Definitely, if you're giving it a shot, I would say read 3 or 4 of the books before you make a decision. They're long books. Asking that, like, I don't think any of them is under 200,000 words, which is a lot. Asking a new person to invest in Malazan is kind of crazy, because like, hey, read 3 or 4 books of this long series and you might be clueless for most of it. That's a lot, I understand, but I think it's worth it in the end. Let's talk about my ranking and why. I'm going to tell you what my ranking is so far, the first 8 books that I've read. I'm going to go into spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, come back next time. If you're going to hop off, thank you for coming. Time to talk some spoilers and such. My ranking. Let's talk about it. Number 1, Reaper's Gale. I don't see this that much, and I'm confused why. I'm sure I'll figure it out later. If you didn't like Reaper's Gale, tell me about it in the comments and why. 1, Beak. Beak is awesome. I wish Beak's story had been longer. Like, he had drawn it out a little bit more throughout the entire book. Beak's story made me cry, and that automatically shoots you up in the rankings if you can make me feel things. So it was heartbreaking, and that's one of the big reasons. The other reason is, I mentioned it earlier a little bit before, is the campaign that happens. I think the campaign that happens in Reaper's Gale with the bone hunters creeping through the woods and the guerrilla warfare, I think that was awesome. I liked the way he painted the picture by giving you the different teams. It took a little bit for me to adjust to. Like, it took a good quarter of the book to be like, okay, this is what's happening. Okay, that's who that is. And it was confusing initially to be like, oh, who's in what squad? What squad? Ooh, that could have been a little bit clearer. But I really like that. And it's the leadership style of Tavor in that situation is also really interesting, but eventually I'd like to get into that. We'll see. Possible collaborations in the works for that. I liked the tension between Karsa and Icarium, how that whole thing was being built up, because I think in the past, first of all, Icarium's power has been built up, all right? And it's been shown to be like, oh my gosh, he's going to lay waste to everything through flashbacks, through actions, through just, it's been foreshadowed a lot. So you're just like, okay, if he fights the Undying Emperor, guess what? It's going to be over. You're not just being told, but you have been shown over the entire time. And then you have Karsa that you're like, wow, he was pretty much his match, and things going on. It's kind of crazy, so we'll see what happens. And his whole dynamic with Samar Dev, I really like their dynamic outside of the whole sleep with me woman thing. I'll say this now, I really don't think Erikson does romance well at all. Most of the romances that I've seen that have happened in these books have just been like, oh, they like each other now. Oh, they're in love. And I'm like, what? Did I miss something? Okay. With romances in the series, I'm kind of like, okay, cool, move on. I don't try to predict romances. I don't try to whatever. It's just like, oh, I didn't see that coming. But okay, then. We'll see if that changes, if I appreciate his romance better in the reread. But we'll see. Anything else for Reaper's Gale? Ooh, Karsa. You'll hear about this when I talk about House of Chains, but I initially didn't like Karsa that much. Over the breadth of the books that he's been snippets in, I've come to like him a lot more. I really like his whole character development and plotline of, I'm not going to be held down by chains. You want to chain me? Screw you. I think that's great. That whole sense of freedom, themes of freedom that he kind of tries to embody in his own weird way. Definitely worth taking a look at in a later video. Number 2, Bone Hunters. So it's interesting, in a lot of rankings that I've seen, Bone Hunters and Reaper's Gale tend to be like really far apart. Like I'll see people that like have Bone Hunters at S tier and then Reaper's Gale down at like D. And I'm like, why though? I mean, you got the Siege of Yucatan, which is crazy in and of itself. You got the hallucinogenic honey and all this other crazy stuff. The being born through the fire and that whole sequence of Yucatan was really cool. I appreciate it more. In the moment, I was like, okay. But I appreciate it more after the fact, which is kind of consistent throughout a lot of the things. The very last part of Bone Hunters, oh my lord, that was amazing. Kalam's fight scenes, the tension in Malaz City was built up exquisitely. You have no idea what's going to happen, no idea why people are there, you're just trying to figure things out and what's all happening, and Spiderweb, and oh my lord, it was great. Bone Hunters is number 2. I also like the Piran scenes in Bone Hunters. I think we see little enough of him as Master of the Deck. And I want to see more of him. I'm assuming in Dust of Dreams and Crippled God we'll probably see more of him, but we'll see. I mean, he's got a freaking army now, which is cool. We'll see if he lives up to it. Lives up to Whiskey Jack's name, essentially. Or Whiskey Jack's legacy. I feel like he has that on his shoulders a little bit now. The Bridge Burner legacy. Though the question is he like doubly ascendant, essentially? Because he was one of the Bridge Burners? Did he get like a little bit ascendant from that, but also ascendant because he's the master of the deck and some other stuff roll along with that? Number 3. We're on number 3. Memories of Ice. This was the first book that I was like, I really like this. This is really cool. I like this series a lot. So this was my first love, you could say. This is definitely my favorite book. Siege of Capustan. Whew, that was great. This is where I think Erikson really came into his own with the POVs and the battle scenes, because you get the hopping between different POVs and you see the siege from different perspectives and you see that anime moment with Gruntle and the bodies piling up in the house and all this other crazy stuff. This is the first time you get introduced to the Kachane Shamail. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but thanks, fantasy. They're just dinosaurs with swords on their arms. That's just awesome, okay? The whole Itkovian storyline was interesting, and it's interesting enough that I really want to come back to, especially after Toll the Hounds, just like looking through that, his storyline, and how that led up to that. And then the Battle of Coral, the Bridge Burners dying. I'm more attached to them after the fact. After this book, I just kind of had to sit down and be like, wow, wait, the Bridge Burners are like a staple of the series, and they're all dead. Most of them are dead by book 3. What is going on here? Question mark. But I'm looking forward to getting back into Memories of Ice on the reread. I mean, I'm looking forward to all of them. I keep saying that. Number 4. Toll the Hounds. So throughout this book, I felt like I had a lot of pressure from this book because I had, on one hand, Library of Alexandria, who did not like this book at all because of how what a slogfest it was, to a certain extent. And then you have people like Andy Smith, who really, really liked Toll the Hounds. It's like, oh my gosh, that's his masterpiece. That's Erikson's masterpiece. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I really like this. It's not my favorite, but I did really like it. This is a very spiderweb book for me, because you have all these different threads that are going on throughout the book, and it's like, what is happening? Like 3/4 of the book, very little happens. It's just set up, and it's intrigue that you don't see almost for a bunch of it. That was very sloggy and kind of just like, okay, come on, what's happening? But then the last quarter, man, that last quarter, oh my gosh. The last quarter was amazing. All these things, you see the threads happening, all this other jazz, and wow. You see a lot of things happening. You see Rake's death, and then Rake's death, which was epic. You see the Traveler, you realize that, I didn't realize the Traveler was Decim Ultor until this book, I think. And you see Karsa fighting everybody fighting the Hounds of Light. And I don't even know what's happening with the moon and that dying. I think I heard about the moon dying before, but I'm still kind of like, what's happening here? Light's coming? Okay. Doesn't seem like a good thing. I mean, because Erikson does flip things on the head, so dark and light aren't moral spectrums anymore. In this series, at least. There's a lot that happened. I think there's a lot that happened that I didn't understand. There's some things that happened that I didn't understand. But I did get the sense of all the threads coming together, and I saw the threads coming together, and that was great to see. There were some epic moments that I really liked, and redemptive moments, and compassionate moments. Number 5, Deadhouse Gates. Deadhouse Gates is one I had to sit on for a while. Read this, I was like, okay, that was a decent book. That was interesting. Like the sacrifice at the end with Coltane and everybody, I was like, wow, that's a decent book. And even after Memories of Ice, I kept like going back to Deadhouse Gates a little bit and be like, wow, it's better than I thought it was. Like having discussions with people about it. And it's not like, yeah, this is still number 5. But this is number 5 out of, a lot of really good books, honestly. I liked his battle scenes in like the crossing of the river with the butterflies, and all that imagery was really cool. And then coming back to it later, I think we came back to this specific crossing later in the series. I don't remember when though. But I was like, I was there. I remember being there. Dewricker's journey was really moving to go on with him. I'm again, like all of them, I'm really looking forward to this one on a reread, just to be there again and experience it. Because Deadhouse Gates was not a spiderweb book where there's a lot of things going on, a lot of things behind the scenes. I mean, there's a little bit with Shadow Throne and Cotillion kind of interacting with Kalam and Fiddler, but there's more in the moment theming than grand overarching schemes going on. That doesn't really kick in, I feel like, until Memories of Ice, because that's when you first meet the crippled god. Number 6. So this one is a favorite for a lot of people, but honestly I just wasn't into it, and this is where we get into my they were okay. Midnight Tides. These last 3, Midnight Tides, Gardens of the Moon, and House of Chains, these 3 are kind of interchangeable. I didn't like them. I was like, on them for different reasons, so I'm just going to go through them. And these are all 6, 7, and 8 in no particular order. So, Midnight Tides. I couldn't connect with the Tistadur at all. I was like, cool, these things, a brother that's scheming against your brother, but you're kind of Rulad, you're just a douchebag. I thought Rulad was a douchebag that got entrusted with grabbed too much power. Now he's suffering. The depressing nature of everybody around the Tistadur was just like harshing my mellow, man. I don't know why I said that. But I couldn't connect with anybody. And T-Hole and Bug were great, were good, but I don't think they were amazing. A lot of people really love T-Hole and Bug. And I was like, okay, they're kind of witty. That's cool. And he keeps telling us he's a genius, but he doesn't really show it that much. It's okay. I like T-Hole and Bug a lot more in Reaper's Gale. I think a lot more is shown of their characters. I think they're more they're not completely one-dimensional in Midnight Tides. But I think Reaper's Gale adds a lot more dimensions onto them than was in Midnight Tides. And then a lot of the Letheri stuff was just most of you guys just suck or are pretty depressed. I've since talked to a lot of people about this, and I'm like, okay, I can see that. I'm interested. What I'm on a reread, I'm interested just rereading it with the themes in mind, and understanding things that are going on a little bit more, because I think things could have been explained a little bit better to make me, connect with the characters a little bit more going in. Gardens of the Moon. This is more lack of recency bias than anything. I did like this book, but a lot of it I was confused. I think this is partially a spiderweb book, and partially there's a lot of epic moments in this book. But this is the book where you have those spiderwebs, and there's almost no way you can understand everything that's going on in this book because of the lack of context. But that context is built up in later books, so the spiderwebs are a little bit easier to understand because you know so much. You've been just picked up bits and pieces over time. Things like the Finest, the Azath House, Ainamander Rake, all these things, they're really hard to understand. They're difficult to understand because you've had so little time to understand. There's breadcrumbs, but there's very little for you to understand it. Again, I think this might rise on reread. We'll see, because I'll definitely understand the characters more because of previous readings. Last one, House of Chains. One of the main reasons I didn't really like House of Chains was Karsa. I think starting out, Karsa was really unlikable, and I was just like, he's just a douchebag that goes around and conquers things and tries to do whatever, and he's really impetuous and arrogant and really annoying. He improves throughout the series, but there was also the payoff issue with House of Chains. I think there was a lot of things that were built up, whether it was from the yet unnamed Bone Hunters, the Hounds of Shadow. I think those were two of the main ones where the payoff was not worth the build-up. The Bone Hunters and the Dog Slayers just kind of just fall apart at the end because of random things. And the Hounds of Shadow were built up so much by these individual people being like, oh my gosh, the Hounds of Shadow, it's bad, we're gonna die. And then Karsa just comes along and just like, eh. That was anticlimactic for me. And I think that's one of the big reasons with House of Chains that I wasn't big of a fan with it. I think there's definitely a few things that I'm looking forward to exploring more in, with Felison, Heberic, and a few other characters, exploring their paths a little bit more. Karsa, knowing the end of his journey and seeing how he forms, will be a little bit more interesting on a reread. But stay tuned. So that's my ranking for all the 8 Malazan books that I've read so far. Currently, my plan is to read Dust of Dreams, I think in August, because I think I need a break from everything, because this readathon is probably going to put me in a slump. And if I read a Malazan book when I'm at like the fringe of hitting a slump, it's going to like push me over, because it takes me so long to read Malazan books. Like, it usually takes a good 2 weeks for me to read them. And I'd rather not extend that any farther. So I'll be reading Dust of Dreams in August. And then after that, I might take another month break after I finish Crippled God, and then start into a reread. But most importantly, when I reread it, I'm also going to include all the Esselmont books. So I think I'm going to be starting with Path to Ascendancy, and incorporating a bunch of Esselmont books throughout it. I think it's going to take me through 2023, which is fine. I'm look forward to making more Malazan content and talking about with people on Discord. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Let me know your thoughts. Did you not like what I liked? If there's something you hated that I liked, or something that you loved but I didn't like, let me know in the comments. Let's talk.